Thanks everyone for coming today. My hope for today is to probably err on the side of making this a bit more conversational. So I welcome you to jump in if you have thoughts or questions. I've got a few prompts kind of designed into the talk to give you a minute to reflect on a few things and have a little bit of sharing. I guess before I really jump into the context of the presentation and introducing myself, I would love two quick questions if you could type them in the chat. First question is, and I'm trying to think of like the best way to ask this. What size organization, not necessarily do you work with, but are you focused on? For example, you might be a solo consultant, but you're working with a Fortune 500 company. I want to know like what size organization context is like most kind of driving your thinking and the work you're doing right now. So you can just put, small startup, scale up, mid-market, Fortune 500, whatever you feel best characterizes it, because some of the conversation here is I can sort of tweak it, and I'm realizing that the way my screen is set up. Oh, there we go. Show chat. Okay, now I can see it. All right. So yeah, Jason, you're like me. You're kind of all over the board. Definitely appreciate that. Mid-market, medium to large, mid to large manufacturing, large establishment. Okay, so not a ton of startups, but that's good, because what we're going to talk about, it applies even if you're like a solopreneur who's trying to build something, or if you're in a Fortune 100. Whoever's got the money. Nice, Jason. I can appreciate that. And then next prompt is, what is your role? Are you a change leader, coach? Do you work in the organization? What's your functional role or focus? Product manager, agile coach. All right. Engineering manager. Cool. Okay. All right. Nice. Thank you all for sharing. This is about the blend I would expect. So just trying to validate that. This talk is like 20 plus years in the making, honestly. Some of my origin is in the early mid 2000s. I was in a product leadership role, and one of the things that struck me at the time, but it didn't really land on what was happening until maybe 10 years later, was at that point in time, 2004, I would say, is when most of what led to this talk was happening to me. I was in a product leadership role. We had a really robust voice of the customer process. We were doing a lot of good, healthy behaviors that were really focused on users, focused on customers, really understanding their perspective, what problems we were trying to solve for them, make their lives better. And at some point during that journey in that role, I had a peer who, just somewhat seemingly out of left field, the decision was made that they were going to basically require all of our efforts to be governed by the Prince 2 methodology. If you know anything about Prince 2, it's pretty hardcore, traditional waterfall, plan-driven approach, right? All the sign-offs all along the way. Feels punitive when you have to make changes. That was so frustrating for me. And as frustrating as it was, I was just in this position where it's like, I guess that's just the way it is. I have to find a way to make this work for me. And so, I tried to minimize, how much that impacted my ability to try and deliver the right things for the customers I was trying to serve. Fast forward 10 years, 10 years from that point, so about 10 years ago, I was leading my first really big agile transformation for an $18 billion telecom company. And probably about 4 or 5 months in, like, it became crystal clear to me that the technology organization that brought me and my team in really, like, they just wanted, at the end of the day, what I would consider check the box agile stuff, right? It's like, are we doing enough to kind of say we're doing it? They weren't super interested in working through some of the harder dysfunctions and things that needed to really shift within their system. They were a very, like, process adherence focused culture. And literally, when I started working with them, you could see 3 years in a row of just declining top line revenue. And it showed up in what you saw day in and day out with, how the teams were operating. Like, what mattered more than anything in that culture was, are you following the process? Can you show the checklist? Can you show that you checked every box? If you did all those things, doesn't matter what you delivered at the end of the day, you were safe if you followed the process and didn't skip any of the boxes that you were checking. So the third step in my journey, so this is sort of a joint introduction of me along with the origin of why this talk came to be. So fast forward about a year ago, I'm having a conversation with a VP of product at an organization, and all of these experiences kind of come back to me. And, in this conversation, just to let her know, like, what my philosophical grounding was, I told her, I said, here's my experience. My experience is product leaders like you are beset upon on all sides of the organization with extremely well-intentioned peers and colleagues that are doing all kinds of things that are effectively getting in your way and making your job harder than it needs to be. That's my philosophical stance. And so it wasn't long after that like, even like the early notions of this talk came to be, because the ultimate premise here, I'll start off with the call to action. Like, the call to action is, how do we all take ownership of improving our organizational system? I've seen far too often, product leaders in particular, I have like really strong empathy for product leaders, but I hear stories like so consistently about all these different challenges and dysfunctions within the organization, where the organization is probably not optimizing for what would really yield the greatest impact. And so how do we enable really anybody? Like, what we're going to walk through here, I'm sort of coming at it from a product leader's persona point of view. But the approach that we're going to talk about here works for anybody regardless of your role. So you're an engineering leader, you're a change leader, you're a product leader. There's like different lenses, but it's all about, how do we drive a more healthy conversation? All right, so let me figure out where my cursor just went so I can advance the slide. All right, so first off, I've already used the word system a few times. What is a system? My favorite analogy of a system is, think of an engine in a car. If you pop the hood, if the car is running, you can, see that they're probably, these days you can't really see too many moving parts, but you understand that there's this whole collection of parts that are operating in unison to deliver the impact, right? To deliver the horsepower that goes to the drivetrain to turn the wheels to propel the car forward. If you take the engine apart and have the pieces all laying out on your garage floor, you no longer have a system. So when we think about an organizational system, it's not just the pieces, it's how are they interconnected? Like, how do they affect each other? Things like reporting structures, performance metrics, policies, decision-making rights. All of these things are part of our system. And one of the concepts that we're going to talk about here is the notion that for any given organizational system, there likely are unhealthy tensions that are maybe known by some parties, but maybe not be as broadly visible as we would like them to be. So that's kind of part of what this talk is about as well. So thinking about the organizational system, being aware of the system, and being aware of, again, if you're a product leader, great. If you're not, like, this talk totally works if you replace product leader with whatever your role is as well. And one last little piece of context. I've been posting about this over the last few weeks on LinkedIn, but there are a lot of hidden product leaders out there in the world. Folks who might be considered like a business partner or a stakeholder. If you have some constituency, right, it might be external customers. If you're in a B2B scenario, it might be other companies. If you're internally focused, it might be people inside your company. It might be, your customer support agents. It might be your sales team. It might be people in operational functions. But if you've got some group that you're trying to serve and help them solve problems and make their lives better, I would argue that you're a product leader. So I want to establish that context as well. And what we're really talking about here to kind of frame the last piece of context setting is we're going to talk about the cycle of taking ideas and ultimately delivering an impact, solving the problem that we really want to solve, delivering the outcome, making sure that we didn't just build something, but that we solved a problem with our efforts. And so we're going to kind of look at this through the lens of, when you have an idea up front, what are the things that are happening that you might attribute some level of shortcoming? Sadly, these days, strategic initiatives get a lot of investment and they rarely totally hit the bullseye in terms of what was intended or what the hope was up front. So without further ado, I'm going to set the final piece of context, and then we'll get into the meat of the conversation. I call this the idea to impact cycle. If anybody is a big fan of value stream identification and value stream mapping, my apologies. I think there's a time and a place for it. I think it has been one of the most misused and underappreciated, but also underappreciated because it's largely been misused approaches. And what I'm trying to do with approaching the conversation this way, you could absolutely look at this like, sure, this is a value stream map, right? But I'm trying to bubble it up, simplify it. I'm trying to take it to the highest possible level, think of it through the most simple lens, because we don't want to get into the minutia of every single action and showing where we have wait times and all that. That's a great thing to do in the right context, but we're trying to have a little bit of a different conversation here. And so the cycle, as I like to break it down, again, complete oversimplification. Should there be recursive arrows all over the place in this diagram? 100% recursive arrows, but for this conversation, we're really trying to distill it to this most simple concept. So we've got 4 subcycles here, which is, what does it take to go from, I have an idea, right? I've heard something from a customer or a user about an unmet need. I have an idea for how we might be able to do that, to the point where we've decided to invest in it. This holds true even if you're a solopreneur, right? You're one person. You're out changing the world all by yourself. you still have some kind of a decision that's happening there between hearing an idea and deciding to invest in. The investment looks different, right? If you're a solopreneur, probably the most valuable investment decisions you can make is where do you spend your time. So it could be a time investment. If you're working in a Fortune 500, it could be a lot more rigorous. There could be some fairly high investment hurdles, different criteria that need to be met. So again, anywhere from a one-person organization to a Fortune 500, something is happening there. Similarly, the next subcycle is, okay, we have decided, yes, we're going to pursue this idea, to we've built it and it's functionally complete. The third subcycle is it's functionally complete, so it's built, and what needs to happen between it's functionally complete and now it's actually launched. And then the fourth subcycle, which is missing in my experience in far too many environments, is evaluating the impact, right? You all have probably seen, I've worked with a number of Fortune 500 organizations where there's a lot of rigor that goes into the idea to investment subcycle, and there's virtually no rigor after launch, right? It's like, cool, it's done. What's the next thing? So that's the framing here. And now we're gonna have just a conversation around, where do things feel harder than they ideally should? And thinking about it through that cycle. This is something that I've been playing with for a while, but it sort of maps that higher level intent. And you can see the second row here is a sentiment map. I want to know, and again, this is designed for a product leader. It works for any persona though. Even if you're an engineering leader, you might, have certain parts of this whole cycle where you're really happy, things are working great. There's other areas where, you got a big frowny face because something is harder than it should be. So that's the prompt that we're going to go through on the next few slides and have some conversations around it. Is, where does it feel harder than it should be? Let's name that. Like, what is the challenge that we have in that context? And then the third row there of the optimization tensions is, we want to name, what does it feel like from our perspective? It feels like we're over optimizing for financial control over product leadership flexibility in managing investments, as an example. And then the last row is just, okay, we've named and labeled that tension. Now, who are the people that we want to go have a conversation with? Because again, the whole idea of this is, we want to create hopefully an easier way to sort of unlock the conversation around, hey, I think there's some opportunities for us to improve our system, and we'll talk a bit about that. So the first subcycle, idea to investment, system tensions. I've got one, I'll tell like an expedited story around this, but many of you have probably experienced some level of this, where I had one client that it was the story started about a year before I started working with them, where in their annual planning process, they had identified a customer need, and they built out a business case with, full-blown ROI scenario. What's the investment? What's our return on this investment? And long story short, they went ahead and approved it. And the business case that they built said, if we build this thing in the first half of the year, launch it by July 1st, we anticipate $5 million in new revenue. And this was a company that was kind of on the verge of scale up. I guess they were probably early scale up, about 225-ish employees roughly. And like all all this rigor that went in up front to the business case, it slowed down their ability to get started, but it also kind of locked them in to just go build it, right? This is the $5 million thing. Go build it, launch it by July 1st, and within 6 months we'll have $5 million more in the company coffers, right? I'll tell more of that story coming up in a bit. And then I'm going to just go ahead and I'm sort of grouping the different subcycles here to prompt our conversation. So the next subcycle, investment to build. So what are the obstacles that happen from we decide we're going to build the thing to we build the thing? And I'll tell another brief story. Conversation with a VP of product who's telling me, I have 3 critically strategic initiatives for this year, and I cannot tell you the status of any of them because the way our company is organized, we have 3 divisions within engineering, and each of my strategic initiatives spans the 3 divisions. So I have no idea how things are progressing, if it's going to come together, when it's going to come together. To me, that's one of the all too common challenges, or what's harder than it should be things. And so now I want to hear from you. So thinking about either or both of those subcycles within, just pick your context. Could be like your general combined lived experience, could be a more recent challenge you've been witness to. What do you all see as some of the largest challenges in going from, and it says funding on here. I just literally this morning pivoted the term funding to investment, but I'm realizing I didn't change this slide, so sorry about that. What are the largest challenges in going from idea to funding or investment decision, or from funding to build? So now's where I want to hear from you. Feel free to type in the chat, or just feel free to speak up or raise your hand. Ken, yeah, what have you seen?
Sorry, it took me a little while to find the raise hand button on Zoom. I don't use Zoom a lot. But yeah, what I find is getting upper management. There's a certain amount of trust that's required to use Agile, to go fast, to get things done with high quality and speed. And that's where I run into trouble now. A larger company bought our company, and they have a hard time trusting. And so, like right now, I've got my boss's boss who wants to have a meeting with me and my team every month to show him stats. And
Wow.
he's trying to micromanage a bit. So my job, the way I'm looking at it, is to insulate my team from that, and I'll deal with it. That's one thing I can do to help the team go fast. So it's dealing with people that have the old waterfall mentality and don't realize that they're slowing everything down.
Absolutely. And I see we got in the chat, we've got some different perspectives. Aligned stakeholder decision making when confronted with many choices. Steve's, which is all too common. It's like it's either everything gets funded, or like the cut line is like way farther down the list than it really should be, right? It's
lack of focus, lack of direction, and yeah, everything's in the way, and we're swamped to be able to, more than we can be able to do anything good at. So
yeah. And Jason, comparing apples to oranges with strong opinions for both, as well as pineapples. Yeah. Yeah, to me, that the whole idea to investment subcycle, it's just aligning on what's your definition of value can be a big solve there. Everybody's got their things. And of course, from a system perspective, sadly, a lot of times we see, any number of leaders in an organization that, have different, often competing priorities. And so it's, literally there's a lot of waste and churn in the system trying to rationalize and figure out what really should we be focused on. All right, thanks for weighing in. So now we're going to look at the next two subcycles. So build to launch. What are some of the cross-functional challenges? So, like I said, the thing's functionally complete, but what needs to happen to get it launched? To me, support readiness is one of the biggest things I've personally seen. I know I had one experience where we were shooting for like a late September production deployment of a pretty big investment that had been going on. Like some of the earliest spend on it, was like had started 18 months prior to that. And of course, the conversations between product engineering and support happened about a month before the anticipated launch. Who thinks 1 month to start having a conversation with support is a really good idea to make sure you hit your launch date? Anybody? And you're like, what the heck were you thinking, right? As you can imagine, and because of the system, right, support is measured on how do we minimize calls, how do we get people on and off calls as quickly as possible. And so when there's a launch coming, they're totally focused on, we need to understand the 137 different things that somebody might call and ask us about, and we need to have a way to like troubleshoot and follow and like pinpoint every single question that somebody's going to hit us with. And if you're starting that conversation a month before you want to launch, you're probably not going to have the level of detail that they want. So that was certainly one pretty intense pain point in one of the things that I was working on. Another thing that I heard about this with a client that I'd worked on, where they literally had, from time to time, they would run out of hours in the funding code that the regression and performance testing team was going, and like they would literally get stopped. It might only be for a few days, or it might be for a week, but like they would literally stop the team from getting things to launch ready because they didn't have any more hours, and they had to go back to some like funding review committee to like see, do we have more budgets and we can allocate more hours to this code so that these people, it's like, are you kidding me? Like that's a thing? Like we're doing that. So those are a couple of examples of build to launch tensions that I've experienced. You probably are hopefully thinking of some similar examples. And then the last subcycle is launch to impact. Like what instrumentation do we have in the things we're building and deploying to be able to look at the leading indicators? What behaviors will we see? Like, is there some new thing that, we expect there to be 20% of this kind of user is going to click on this thing within, the first week of it being launched? And, how can we see the trend versus just sitting back and waiting? The example I gave up front about the $5 million opportunity, they had no instrumentation on this thing that they deployed. And so they literally it's a slight oversimplification, but maybe not as much of an oversimplification as you would hope, that they largely launched the thing on time and just sat back waiting for the checks to come in and for people, the sales orders to come in, right? They didn't have the instrumentation. They should have been able to tell probably within a week, if not days or even hours of launching something, given, what was happening in the solution that was live, nobody's clicking on this thing, right? Or, whatever it is, like, how do we instrument that? And how do we really measure, our business case said X, Y, and Z, what's actually happening live with our customers? And so being able to evaluate and instrument things to get in front of it, like, shame on us, we didn't get enough feedback and pivot while we built it. Let's at least try to get feedback and see if we can react more rapidly, certainly once it's live. And so, same prompt, what are the largest challenges in your context that you've experienced with the build to launch and the launch to impact subcycles? What are you all seeing out there? Everybody knows the whole silence is a facilitation technique thing, right? Anybody still seeing like any scenarios similar to the ones I shared, right? Like support, lack of interest in collaborating with the customer. Yeah, that's certainly a good one. Yeah, I mean, there's a cost associated with that, right? And a lot of times we're trying to optimize. That's the whole point of this, is sometimes we're optimizing for things that we think it's only giving us benefits, but we're not seeing, like, what are the costs of not making a given decision. And so the last sort of domain here of again, this is more focused on the product function lens here, but if you are a product leader, or you're working, in an organization collaborating with product leaders, hopefully this rings true. There might be some ways you can lean in and help, but there's certainly individual challenges with, I'm a product leader. Where am I spending my time? Am I being savvy with how I'm utilizing AI? Like, to me, that's one of the biggest things. One of the things I advocate for is for the product function. How do you leverage AI to sort of move the fences back and not rely so heavily on, sister teams or sister functions in the organization? How do you elevate and deliver a more fully fleshed out, like, prototype, for example? Like, you have an idea for something with the AI tooling that exists today. Like, literally, it's amazing things I've seen done in minutes to help take a concept, right? Like, let's shift from, like, it's a bunch of words in a document to, a picture's worth 1,000 words. How do we do that more quickly? And even some of the prototypes, like some of the no code solutions that are out there, imagine being able to hand off, not hand off, engage engineering, shouldn't say hand off. When you first engage engineering, say, here's a prototype that I built that is directionally aligned with what I want to do, right? Like, you could probably do that inside of an hour these days, versus just talking about features and maybe doing story mapping and breaking down stories. Like, have something that's gonna, again, kind of move that fence back. Like, you've done some of the work that you might have relied on somebody else to do, and you're doing it fast, and you can do your fast initial pivots to get it more dialed in. The other thing I like to call out here on the internal product function tensions is around leadership alignment. And in particular, a pattern I see a lot is, you've got like a senior director of product, maybe a VP of product a lot of times in an organization, it might be that senior director of product that genuinely knows more about, the art of product, and they might sort of be somewhat handicapped because the person they report to might not really understand things as well as they do, and so they're always having to, uh, you know, fight an uphill battle. There's friction there, and how do we help the leader in that that might be in that position to go have the right kinds of conversations? That's really what this whole approach is all about as well. So I'm going to just go back quickly to this map, but for whatever the tension, right? The idea here is think about what's most in your way. What feels harder than it should? How do I label it? And how do I go have a conversation? Because without something like this, in my experience, when it's just product leader going to talk to finance, sometimes it can be a productive conversation. Sadly, more often than not, the conversation is, this is how we do it. It's like, this is our policy. This is how governance works. Like, there's all kinds of, this is the way it is. You're going to have to make it work. And my hope for everybody, regardless of role, is that we can have more effective and more productive conversations where it's not me versus you. It's not function A versus function B. It's, let's look at our system and let's say, where are we over optimizing for one thing and what is it costing us, so we can crack open those conversations. What thoughts, reactions, questions do you all have about taking a look at a system, trying to crack open, the right kinds of conversations for improving the system? What thoughts do you all have?
I'll jump in for a bit. I haven't had success steering the Titanic. I have had success in my wing, in the ballroom where I'm coordinating things, just making it happy there, and try to insulate them from whatever's going on outside so that they can focus. I'm kind of a conduit to look at what the vision is and make sure we're executing as productively as we can on that vision, and just keep my team happy, keep my little room happy.
Yeah, I love that, because let's just say you did this and you mapped out, there's three things with like a big old frowny face on it. There's probably one thing that you've got some ability to sort of insulate and like do some things locally, right? There's probably one thing that, maybe you could change it, but it's a much bigger conversation. And then there's probably the third thing that it's like, yeah, good luck trying to crack that conversation open in the next 5 years, right? There's always, there's always things that are gonna feel and might actually be much more immovable. But like, to me, that's my hope, is utilizing something like this. It's like, let's zoom out for a minute. Let's look at where are things harder than they should be. Where can we locally control some things to improve our lives? Where are some, where do we have the right relationships where we probably can make some changes sooner than later, right? It's the whole idea of start small, identify some experiments. And let's see, Kip in the chat says, what do you see the scope of system where agile practitioners have an influence? Yeah, when you say practitioner, so let's just put a label on that. So you're a scrum master for 3 teams. Let's use that context, right? I think it's about understanding, given your purview and what you see, what are the biggest pain points? Because if you can identify who's involved in that and go have the conversation, um, I'll share another brief story where years ago, literally, we came back from like the holiday break, and early January, a decision was being made to launch in a streaming app a sports zone capability. And within the streaming app, there was nothing particular sports related, but they wanted to build an area that you could go, you could like set some favorite teams, you could look at a scoreboard, and if any of the games on the scoreboard were being televised that you had access to on your service, you could just tap watch and fire up the game. So the goal was to get this thing launched by the middle of March, in time for the NCAA March Madness tournament. So we had like 9 weeks to try and get this whole feature built and launched. And the conversation there was, okay, product has a goal, and the way we work currently in that environment was there were 3 different teams that were involved in that. And like I basically really quickly had conversations with the right stakeholders that said, if you all want to get this thing delivered inside of 9 weeks, we can't have 3 different kinds of tickets going to 3 different backlogs, and this team does something and hands it off to another team, and then they find defects and put it in their backlog. I'm like, at that point, we need to be launch ready. So I got all the stakeholders aligned with, okay, we're going to build a truly cross-functional team for this effort. And that was basically coming from a similar position of, hey, like you're coming to this team, but there's 2 other teams, and what do we need to do to change our system to be able to execute on this goal? That's one personal example that I have. I don't know, Kip, do you have any other thoughts? Any other scenarios come to mind for you?
Yeah, thanks for answering that. I guess just in terms of the whole agile practitioner, whether it's Scrum Master or maybe Scrum of Scrums, a little bigger scale and so forth, where you mentioned you go to finance and they have walls or policies or procedures or whatever else, things that are in your environment that you hit on every project.
Yeah.
How do you see agile practitioners hitting those that may not be within the scope of their project?
Yeah, I would say for me, like when I've been having that kind of a conversation in that kind of a context, I can't not see the system. So I'm a little bit, maybe a little bit of an outlier, but I'm always encouraging in a team level kind of a conversation. Let's say it's in a team retrospective. I always like to frame what is making your life harder than it should be, and which of those things, I like mapping it on the continuum of, on one end of the scale, we have total control, we can do something about this. In the middle, it's right, like we have some ability to influence. And if it's all the way on the other end of the spectrum, then it's, yeah, like this is a hardcore constraint, and it's one of those turning the Titanic things that like we would probably need VP or C-level or above help with. But at least always prompting the team that the idea of a retrospective isn't only to pick things that you can do, it's also to elevate what's making your life harder than it should be, because somebody needs to be taking those things and championing on behalf of the teams, from my perspective.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and again, like the whole origin of this came from from my personal experiences, me working in organizations where, you know, that middle point of my story where I was talking about, it became obvious that technology, like they just wanted to do the bare minimum, and they didn't really want to. They didn't want to do the things that are frankly like a little bit harder, right? Like they wanted to have as close to fixed scope as possible, right? Like they wanted to do agile, but they didn't really want to have to pivot. And it's like, hold on a second, like you are completely robbing your market facing, you know, product leaders from like what one of the chief benefits of effective agile is, which is we have a hypothesis. We think if we build these things that it will solve this problem in an effective way. Can we please verify? Because in my experience, probably the most value that you get out of an agile approach is determining as early as possible when you need to pivot, right? Anybody can just go on a straight line and not pivot. And if your governance process and your performance measures all incentivize those behaviors, well, your system is fairly jacked up, to be honest, right? Because shouldn't we be doing whatever we need to do to help the market facing leaders actually solve customer problems? And so, yeah, I want to be able to unlock those conversations. I want product leaders, you know, again, I think this conversation works regardless of your role, but in particular, I want product leaders to be able to, frankly, to be able to call BS, because there's a lot of organizations where they're not getting what they probably think they're getting, and what they're, you know, what's being positioned in terms of how the other supporting functions, including engineering around them, are supposed to be helping to enable product impact. That's my belief, based on, certainly that is a statistically validated fact from my personal experience. Any other thoughts, ideas, questions, feedback? Like what, you know, what do you like about this whole notion? What would make it better? What's not clear? Any feedback for me is super valuable.
I will just say for me, what I like about it is its simplicity, right? And as a Canvas tool, which this one, it feels like it's a canvas, right? To organize the brainstorm.
Yeah.
I appreciate that part of it is there wouldn't be so much data on here for me to try to evaluate on, hey, what should I do, or where should I focus? So that I appreciate that.
Awesome, thank you. That was my intent, because I got to tell you, I've been a part of some value stream related activities that were super detailed, super in depth, all kinds of insight that happened as we were doing it. But I have never, not one time, had even like more than maybe 10% of what that told us actually convert into meaningful, tangible, near-term action. Like, and I've done it with some pretty, you know, like Fortune 100 companies, and it's like the result is almost always the same. Everybody looks at it and they are shell-shocked. They're completely shell-shocked. It blows them out of the water. And so one of my stories, the second really big transformation that I led was actually with Nike Technology. And I already had that opinion, and I told them, I said, look, we can do one of two things, and maybe, you know, there's some shades of gray in the middle. One, we can go through the value stream exercises and see what it tells us, and we can go reorganize and align with those. And I said, I have yet to meet the senior leadership team that has been willing to say, okay, we're going to do what that analysis tells us we should do. And so the other option I gave them was, we just start where we are and we map where are our largest dependencies, and we operationalize on an ongoing basis, how do we move skills and knowledge? Doesn't necessarily need to be moving a person. Sometimes, a lot of times that might be the easiest, but how do we operationalize the continuous shift towards more value stream alignment? And frankly, that worked really well. So I've always been an advocate of that. Like every time it's like, we're going to do a value stream exercise, it's like, I want them to like sign a contract. It's like, it's likely to tell you these kinds of things, which would likely spur these kinds of actions. Tell me right now if you're willing to take these actions, because if you aren't, why are we going to waste our time? If you want to dig deeper, I would encourage you could take the product impact scorecard to answer 25 questions and get some diagnostics on where are things healthy, where do we maybe have some opportunities within a given system. So would love to have you check that out, and if you have any feedback on that, I would love to hear that as well. And also, I'm always happy to connect on LinkedIn. Feel free to connect. And if you want a copy of the canvas as it's coming together, be happy to send you that. And I've got one other asset that I'd be happy to send you. So always open to connect, always open to, for general networking, if you're looking to hire somebody, trying to look for connections into a company, always happy to have those conversations as well.